Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 8, Minneapolis. Let's watch.
By that at all. She was, though. My issue was that he said something and then took it back. Obviously, everyone makes mistakes and, whatever, but that was just
I feel like when it comes to Madison's footage on this show, I feel like I'm going crazy. He told her he was going to rescind it after she broke up with him, right? I don't want to go back and watch that scene. At the very least, she went into that date intending on breaking up with him. And yeah, I'm 95% sure she was at least heading into a breakup conversation with him, or after she broke up. And then he's like, yeah, well, I was going to, because she was criticizing him, right? For committing? I don't know. It's the exact sequence, but everyone makes mistakes, but that was just like, ugh. What? Ugh. You pressured him. He committed. So again, this is just more ticks in the column of some sort of transference, displacement, and as another issue or another way of looking at it is projected identification. And I can't know, of course, but the way she recalls a lot of it does not match up with the data, which either means she's lying on purpose or she is distorting the data and she speaks from that distortion. It just kind of looks that way.
You don't do that. You should know better at your big age.
Yeah. I guess I wasn't there, so I don't know what really happens. I just know what he told me.
It is interesting that he is holding fast. And given what I have seen, what we have seen, I think that it makes sense to me, but he doesn't know. He wasn't there. And he said this, he's like, I'm an understanding person, meaning I understand both sides. But he's really hammering on this, right? And it makes me wonder if he headed into this date hoping that she would have a pro-Mason or at least a more neutral narrative. And if he wasn't going to get that, then he was going to break up with her. Because why? Or he's triggered. His preoccupation is being triggered. That she would abandon someone or hurt someone or to be distorted or something. And it's really getting to him. Because from his perspective, he wouldn't have seen almost anything that we've seen. He would not have seen her go into the lounge and say, breakups taste so sweet. Mason didn't see those things. So he has so little information. So in another universe, if none of those things existed, this would not be a good idea for him to do. He would be sabotaging in a way.
Yeah. Well, I don't really trust his narration of the story at this point.
Well, it's in the past, so it's all good now.
Yeah, I guess so. I get that you're understanding, but I almost feel invalidated in that.
So in isolation, this is understandable, what she's saying here, because he is not really believing her. And he's not, if anything, the overall communication or vibe from him is that he very much is on Mason's side, because he wasn't doing any of this to Mason. At least in the edit, when Mason would talk about, he wasn't like, well, that's not what I heard. He's only doing this to her, and he's not saying anything like, yeah, I could understand. He's not doing, he's just not, one could call this passive aggressive, that it's hostile or rejecting in a non-obvious way, because he's saying he understands and he's listening. He's not directly criticizing or attacking or anything, but in the absence of saying anything validating or anything positive, the implication is there. So in isolation, I understand why she's saying this.
No, I think you're completely valid. I also think he's completely valid, and
And if he does, and he wants to retain this relationship, then he should demonstrate it. It's interesting, because I was assuming they were going to get engaged, which kind of, if they don't get engaged, that bumps me out because I, at least selfishly, was interested in seeing them both post pods. And I can't imagine, but I don't know, they've recovered from 2 other events like this. But he seems to be pretty rigid about this, and I cannot see a way through the woods for Madison because of her attitude about it, unless she just completely obliges Alex and fakes that she is sorry or something. Anyway, so am I now rooting for this couple? And I guess I was assuming that I still was, because once I kind of established that in my heart, I guess it kind of stuck. But I guess if I revise that, I would say, well, I don't know. I mean, given both of their issues, I could see them being a good couple. There would probably be a fair amount of volatility, but there's the awareness, seemingly the humility there. They at least had in the past talked about their understanding of their own issues and willingness to look at it. I guess I am still pulling for them, depending on how much they work on themselves as they go. But if not, and if she has issues that are much bigger and completely out of her awareness, then yeah, I guess I wouldn't be rooting for them anymore.
He's completely valid in saying that he's committed to me and then taking it back.
I just appreciate his perspective. I also appreciate yours, and so I see everyone's perspective.
Yeah, and he's not getting into specifics, which isn't going to help. You know, he could say this one, well, the way that I see it, Mason is a good guy, and for my, I don't know, so you can try it, maybe pause it and think about what you might say. If we imagine ourselves in Alex's shoes, knowing what he would know, putting ourselves in his mind, and he wouldn't know what we know, then he really should word it more tentatively. And if he intends on breaking up with her, then just break up with her. Don't beat around the bush. But he should be saying, if he is there to potentially get engaged, he should say something like, well, I don't know, I just have Alex's point of view and yours, and I don't have much information, but it just seemed like to me that Mason was genuinely really into you and Meg. And, you know, he's not the most expressive guy, and I could see him being a little confusing, but I believe, you know, we had a lot of talks, and I believe that he really was into both of you. I don't think he was lying about anything. And he, in the moments of passion, committed to you, and then changed his mind, which happens sometimes. By changing his mind, I don't think he didn't like you. I think he still liked you, but I think he just realized he wasn't ready to determine which one of you was his number one and which one was number two. That's all that it was. So I don't know if that's true, and you have other information and data that I do. So that's just the way it looked to me. I can validate you because you're telling me, and based on what he was saying, it sounds like he told you that he was committing to you, which, you know, that's a big deal. And then to hear later that he was pulling it back, it can feel rejecting. I would be curious if I were him. It's like, well, what is the emotion? Is it care? You know, and I wouldn't lead the witness, because the things that would be of an option would be care for Meg, would be that she would be hurt, but by that phase, she shouldn't care that much, because Alex and her had established that they were very much in all likelihood moving down the road together. So there's that. Or is it just that you don't like people to say one thing and then change their minds? Is that what it is? Because it's not materially of importance to you that he either committed or pulled it back, because you weren't interested in him, apparently. So from her side, what she could do is try to put herself in his shoes and say, okay, well, from your perspective, I could, you know, and you like Mason, and from your perspective, that's the way it looks to you. And maybe it was, but my experience, and she could validly say this, it didn't look this way to us, but she could validly say, from my perspective, it looked like he was being dishonest. And I didn't like that. I don't like people that are dishonest. I have a thing with that. And it might not make a lot of sense because I didn't really want to be with him, but when I see dishonesty, it really just gets to me, particularly around stuff like that. I don't know if it was manipulative, but it felt manipulative to me, and it really irked me. And so I don't have a lot of sympathy for him, but maybe I was reading it wrong. She could say that, right?
Do you have anything to say about that or no?
I was hurt by him, and it just sucks for you to be like, well, he's so valid. What I'm probably looking for here is not to hear how valid he is and how right he is. I think I just was looking for you to be like, yeah.
Okay, so that was healthy, and this is reminding me of the early healthy behavior from Madison, that she can say, it was hurt, it hurt. There's a lot of responses that I could imagine Madison engaging in right now. This is vulnerable. It's not avoidant. It's not hostile. This is cutting to the core of it. She's saying it hurt her when he did that, when Mason did that. It's a little confusing as to why that would be hurtful, but people can be hurt for all of us get hurt by ridiculous things. There's a good chance that literally 90, depending on the situation, if you're in an abusive relationship, it's completely different. But if it's not that, well, I'll just speak for myself, that 90% of the things that I feel hurt by that my wife does are not empirically, scientifically, objectively hurtful to me. It's just misinterpreted by me and or distorted, or I'm in a bad mood, or most of what I get hurt by or worried about rejection about is not the way that everyone would react. Some of it would be maybe the way other people, but at the very least, it's very often a misreading of the situation or an overreaction or something.
I'm sorry he made you feel that way, and that's it.
I'm definitely sorry that he made you feel that way.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There's something a little weird about Alex's approach, because if he were truly concerned, or if this was a red flag for him, which it seems like it is, then I think he should just ask more questions like, so what was it about that hurt you? And what did Mason do exactly? And, or stuff like that. Because then at the very least, it would help him to understand what was really going on for her. Because I've been wondering what his whole purpose is in this conversation. I was hoping that it was him trying to assess a red flag, but I don't know, because if he's not going to do any follow-up, or maybe he was, but he's realizing that it's getting off the rails, and so he's just like, but he's still kind of irked by it, but he's just pushing forward to hopefully get into a better space for the two of them. I don't know.
Keep thinking about him and how upsetting that was.
I think he was just confused. Like, he didn't try to, cause conflict or anything.
I just don't want to hear about it, honestly.
Well, what else do you want to talk about?
I don't know, if you kind of ruined the mood.
I know.
Yeah. It feels doomed. Mostly because I think they're late in the 10 days. I wouldn't be surprised if this was day 8, and from my understanding, day 8 is the last day they can have dates. Day 9 is the proposals. Maybe there can be some circumstances where they can have dates on day 9 and then propose if it comes to that. So I think it's late because of the way it looks in the lounge. We can never tell because I'm pretty sure they move stuff around a lot, especially when it comes to people getting engaged. So it's hard to tell, but I'm guessing they're late in the 10 days. And since they don't have time to recover, right? If they have a bad date here, they don't have time to have a makeup date to correct for it. Plus, I can't see how they're going to make up for this. Because Alex is I'm really curious what's going on with Alex. And there's a possibility that, given that Alex has very little information compared to even us. I mean, he has more information in another category, like with Mason and with her, but he doesn't have all that stuff that we've seen. And if I'm guessing right about what he would know, what he's doing here is concerning. The approach that he has, his stance, I understand, but the way he's going about it, he's not trying to understand where she was coming from. Now, I don't think it's understandable what her perspective. I don't think it's possible for him to understand it, because I don't think anyone would really get exactly. But he's not even trying. So I think there's some kind of, because he's being surface is one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is off-puttingly judgy from a distance.
But oh, okay, 20 years from now, let's say it's Christmas morning, and I want to get super into like decorating for holidays.
I am having a hard time thinking future-minded right now.
Yeah, awkward. It's interesting. I just wonder what is going through his mind right now. He changes the subject, which is good if the goal is to lighten the mood. But the fact that he's not intuiting that some bonding needs to occur in order, some reassurance that he doesn't hate her, it's not obvious, or it's not necessarily a viable interpretation that he hates her, right? But you know what I mean? And I think that's all it would take, would be for him, and I don't know if this is valid, but if he were to turn and say, hey, sorry, I get anxious, and I like Mason, and we won't talk about it, but I wasn't there, and I wasn't there for all the conversations, but I do think that Mason is a good person, and I know that you're a good person, and I just don't know enough information to know what happened and what the best perspective is. But when I hear your perspective, I totally get it. He told you one thing and then rescinded it, and that was concerning. It hurt you, and I totally get that. And when I talk to Mason, like I understand him, but it doesn't mean that by understanding him, I don't absolutely understand you as well. There's no effort from him in that way. From the outside watching this, I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do, because I don't think Madison's point of view is redeemable, but he doesn't know all that unless he has other information. I don't know.
It's happened a lot over there.
Sorry. Am I making you anxious?
I think so, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And separate from whether or not this couple is a good idea or not, it would, as I've been saying, more likely to work if they had waited until they were in person to have this conversation.
Do you laugh when you get awkward?
Sometimes, yeah. You're still tapping.
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of like shut down or don't talk to me, it's hard for me to know what to do. It's hard for me when I don't know.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other things she could be doing. She could try to account and meet him closer to the middle by offering up something of like, well, it sounds like you care about Mason, and maybe my perspective is not accurate because I'm biased or I read it wrong. So, food for thought. I think that would actually help Alex to warm up or something, I think. But this is a bit of a smaller red flag, but a red flag from him in terms of his approach to this whole conversation. He is worried about being abandoned, and he recognizes that, but the tactic is accusatory, and verbally he's acting, or he believes, he identifies as an understanding person, but it's not understanding of her. I understand that, though. But he doesn't know. I don't think he understands what we do. So I could see him being this way in a situation where it doesn't call for this. He seems to be distorted. He seems to be assuming and operating. So this is good. So what he's doing, I don't know. And I think he would even admit this, or even he's basically saying this, that as he's concerned about abandonment from her, he is resorting to a style that often is misinterpreted. It can look like, at the very least, it can look reasonable or strong. And I'm not saying it's not strong, but it looks logical. It can look either to the individual doing it or from the outside or from a third party or from a therapist. That can be a problem too. It can look like the Alexes of the world are cold and calculating, maybe lacking empathy depending on how it's being observed or how it's being experienced. And if it escalates, it can start to look controlling and highly critical. And it is potentially all those things, but at its core, the individual is freaking out. They are terrified of abandonment. They've been through it so much, and their way of coping is to engage in this style of trying to cope. And it absolutely sabotages themselves, because if he were to say in this moment, because I think this is what's going on for him, hey, honey, I love you, and I am on the verge of asking you to marry me. And the closer we get, the more feelings I have for you, but also the more terror I feel. And I'm having a really hard time sifting through all of it. And I liked Mason, and I don't know what happened. I'm going to assume that if I knew all the data, that everyone would be at least somewhat understandable. I don't know, but it freaks me out to hear about what happened. And when I asked a few questions, I wasn't reassured by you. Not that you are having to reassure me. This is between you and Mason. But I'm just telling you like what's going on for me. And then I was worried that if I inquired more, I would be more worried. And so I'm starting to kind of have distress right now, which is causing me to distance myself from you, which isn't fair to you. And I don't know what to do right now. If he said something like that, it'd be different, right? But that's not what he's doing externally. It's a very different affect, very different presentation. There's a pretty good likelihood that what I role played is what's happening for him. So I say all this because if you're one of these, if you're like Alex, then it's important to recognize those options, at least for your own self-awareness, because if you're not aware of it, it can feel very consciously like, look, I'm just asking questions. I don't know what the big deal is. Because the Alexes of the world come across as very level-headed and very logical and very calm, but they are not. And the vibe being received is not received like that. It's not being received like that by her, right? So it's a way of coping and denying and stuffing, and it's a mistrust of the other person to receive your true self and all that stuff. So we can use that as a jumping off point. All right, well, I want to thank you for subscribing and liking and giving the bell icon situation and commenting. It's all just part of the stuff you can do to help us out. Also, commenting, and I want to thank y'all for creating one of the few non-toxic places on the internet, and specifically on YouTube. I will look at the comments and marvel at how it compares to other parts of the internet, and you all are creating that community and that safety and that culture. I imagine some people will look at the comment section, want to do the kinds of stuff that's in other corners of the internet, and refrain because this is not going to be welcomed. It's not one of those types of places. So you are creating that, and I thank you for that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.